Before he became the man the Germans feared and the Americans argued about, Terry de la Mesa Allen was already a legend waiting to happen. Born in 1888 at Fort Douglas, Utah, Allen grew up surrounded by the rhythm of marching boots and the echoes of bugles. His father was an officer, stripped, polished, and every inch the model soldier. But Terry was different. Where others saw order, he saw confinement. Where others obeyed, he questioned. And where others followed, he led, sometimes straight into trouble. From the beginning, Allen showed two sides of a soldier's soul, brilliance and rebellion. He entered West Point in 1907, ready to carve his path among America's best and brightest. But instead of excelling in discipline, he broke nearly every rule in the book. He was witty, quick-tempered, and impossible to tame. He flunked out, not once, but twice. Most men would have given up, but Allen wasn't built for surrender. He finished his education at Catholic University, determined to wear the uniform, but to wear it his way. When World War II came, Allen finally found his calling. In the chaos of Europe's trenches, the misfit from West Point became a natural leader. His men followed him not because of his rank, but because of his fearless heart. Allen didn't lead from behind a map table. He was always out front, charging through mud, smoke, and machine gun fire. He took shrapnel, got wounded, and kept going. The Army recognized his courage with medals. His men recognized something deeper, that he was one of them. After the war, Allen's energy didn't fade. If anything, peace made him restless. He studied, taught tactics, and wrote about leadership, always clashing with superiors who preferred order over instinct. Allen believed war wasn't won by perfect drills. It was won by men who trusted their commander, even in the worst hell imaginable. That belief made him both admired and controversial. To the bureaucrats, he was too wild. To the soldiers, he was exactly what a general should be. By the time World War II loomed, Allen was no longer a reckless youth, but he still carried that spark of defiance. He was older, tougher, and utterly confident in his way of war. When he was assigned to command the First Infantry Division, the big red one, he told his men something they would never forget. "I don't care about pretty formations or fancy salutes. I care about winning and bringing you all home alive." That single line defined him. In an army obsessed with rules, Terry Allen became the rule breaker who got results. In a war that demanded courage, he became its symbol. The story of terrible Terry Allen was only beginning, and soon the deserts of North Africa would prove just how dangerous a maverick could be. In November 1942, the world's largest war took a new turn. The U.S. Army was finally going toe-to-toe with Hitler's veterans, and Major General Terry Allen was about to prove what real leadership looked like under fire. The target was North Africa. The enemy, Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps, the most feared desert fighters in the world. The sun baked the sand, the air shimmered with heat, and the future of the Allied campaign hung by a thread. For many American soldiers, this was their first taste of combat. But for the First Infantry Division, the Big Red One, led by Allen, it would become their trial by fire. Allen knew his men weren't ready for textbook warfare. They were green, nervous, and far from home. The manuals told him to follow procedure, but Allen had no patience for procedure. He believed in instinct, adaptability, and grit. Before the invasion, he gathered his troops under the burning Algerian sky and shouted, "The enemy doesn't care about your drills, he cares if you can fight, and you will fight." When the landings at Oran began, chaos erupted. Machine guns opened from hidden ridges, artillery pounded the beaches, and confusion tore through the ranks. But where most commanders hid behind radios, Allen was there, on the sand, helmet tilted low, barking orders through explosions. His calm was almost unreal.
Soldiers later said, "If Allen's not scared, neither are we." His courage was contagious. The Big Red One advanced inland, facing German panzers, airstrikes, and ambushes. The fighting was brutal, sand mixing with blood, tanks burning under the desert sun. Yet Allen's leadership turned panic into momentum. He didn't just issue commands, he inspired confidence. When ammunition ran low, he told his men to take what they needed from the enemy. When morale wavered, he reminded them, "You're the First Division. When you move, the world moves with you." The Germans soon took notice. They began calling him Der Schreckliche, the Terrible One, not because of cruelty, but because of how relentless he was. Allen's troops fought like ghosts, striking fast, disappearing, and returning twice as strong. He made the battlefield unpredictable, and that terrified the enemy. By the end of the North African campaign, Allen's division had earned a reputation for ferocity and brotherhood. They had taken cities, crushed counterattacks, and learned the hard truth of war. Survival belonged to those who refused to quit. But Allen's success came at a price. His unorthodox style, eating with his men, cursing with them, and ignoring protocol, began to stir resentment among the high command. To generals sitting safely miles away, Allen seemed undisciplined. To the men in the trenches, he was the only reason they were still alive. North Africa made Terry Allen famous and infamous. He had proven himself in fire and sand. The Germans feared him. His soldiers loved him. But for Allen, the real battle, the one between command and chaos, was only just beginning.
By early 1943, Major General Terry Allen was no longer just another officer. He was a living legend among his men. His First Infantry Division, the Big Red One, had gone from rookies to hardened warriors under his command. But while his troops worshipped him, Allen's name was starting to make waves and enemies in Washington and at Army headquarters. Terry Allen had a reputation. He didn't play by the book. While most generals stayed behind maps, Allen slept in tents alongside his soldiers. He cursed like a private, laughed with sergeants, and made decisions that infuriated bureaucrats. He never wore spotless uniforms or polished boots. His clothes were dusty, his helmet dented, his manner unrefined. To the men who followed him, that made him real. To the generals above him, it made him dangerous. His leadership philosophy was simple. You can't lead men from behind. You lead them by walking through hell with them. Allen's command posts were often closer to the front lines than his officers preferred. He wanted to feel the pulse of battle, to hear the shells, smell the cordite, and see what his soldiers saw. To him, the best decisions came not from reports, but from instinct. That instinct saved lives again and again. But success on the battlefield didn't protect him from criticism. His division became famous not just for victories, but for their wild spirit. They were tough, fearless, and sometimes too undisciplined for the Army's image. After grueling battles, his men would blow off steam with drinking, brawling, and laughter that echoed through the camps. To Allen, it was harmless, men releasing the tension of survival. But to higher command, it was chaos. General George S. Patton, known for his iron discipline, respected Allen's talent, but despised his methods. Patton's troops marched in perfect formation. Allen's wore dusty boots and dirty smiles. The contrast between them was like order versus freedom. When the two men met, sparks flew. Patton's precision against Allen's defiance. Yet even Patton couldn't deny Allen's results. Every time he sent the Big Red One into the fire, they came back with victory.
The men loved Allen because he understood them. He knew their fears, their exhaustion, their jokes, their pain. He refused to ask them to do anything he wouldn't do himself. And that's why they'd follow him anywhere, through bullets, blood, and burning towns. One soldier said, Allen didn't lead from a map. He led from the heart. Still, as his fame grew, so did the whispers. Reports began circulating. Allen's men are too loose. His division is out of control. The same qualities that made him great on the battlefield were becoming liabilities in the politics of war. Terry Allen had broken the rules, but those rules had never won a war. He was the kind of leader soldiers prayed for and bureaucrats feared. And soon, that clash between the battlefield and the boardroom would come to a breaking point on the island of Sicily, where Allen's fate as America's most controversial general would be decided.
The summer of 1943. The Allied invasion of Sicily was underway, and once again, Terry Allen and his Big Red One were at the tip of the spear. The island was a fortress of mountains, narrow roads, and determined German defenders. For the men of the First Infantry Division, the heat was unbearable, the terrain merciless, and the fighting constant. But Allen's soldiers had one advantage the enemy could never match: their trust in him. The campaign began with chaos. Allied units were scattered, supply lines tangled, and communication faltered under the roar of artillery. Yet Allen's instincts, the same ones that had saved lives in North Africa, kicked in again. He didn't wait for perfect orders. He made them. He moved his units with precision and audacity, outflanking enemy positions, turning setbacks into victories. To the soldiers slogging up Sicily's hills, Allen wasn't a distant commander. He was right there, in the dust and gunfire, shouting encouragement and cracking jokes even under fire. He carried binoculars instead of fear, and when men saw him standing tall amid shell bursts, they followed. His courage was their compass. One soldier later said, "When Allen was there, it felt like nothing could touch us." And for a while, it seemed true. The First Infantry Division captured towns, crushed German counterattacks, and kept pushing forward when other units stalled. Their victories were swift, brutal, and costly. Allen's leadership had turned ordinary soldiers into battle-hardened warriors. They didn't fight for medals, they fought for him and for each other. But while the enemy feared Allen, his own superiors were growing uneasy. Reports reached headquarters that his men were undisciplined, unruly, and too independent. Soldiers who had faced death daily were now being judged for laughing too loudly after battle, for drinking to forget what they'd seen. To the high command, Allen's division looked like a problem. To Allen, they were family. Then came the breaking point. General Patton, who had once admired Allen's results, grew frustrated with his refusal to enforce strict military decorum. The two generals, opposites in every way, collided in a storm of pride and principle. Patton believed in fear-based control. Allen believed in loyalty through trust. And though Allen's record was filled with victories, politics spoke louder than heroism. After Sicily was secured, Allen was relieved of his command. No court-martial, no disgrace, just an unspoken punishment for being too human in a machine built for obedience. When the news spread, his men were stunned. Hardened soldiers wept. Some refused to believe it. Others swore they'd never serve another commander like him again. As Allen left camp for the last time, hundreds of soldiers lined the road. They stood at attention, silent, helmets tucked under their arms. When his jeep passed, they saluted, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Terry Allen didn't need medals or praise. He had something rarer, the love of the men he led. He had lost his command, but he hadn't lost his honor. And in time, war would give him one more chance to prove that his way, the human way, was the right way all along.
When Terry Allen left Sicily, it wasn't the end of his story, it was the beginning of his legend. The army might have thought they'd seen the last of him, but war has a way of calling back those who truly belong to it. And Allen, for all his flaws and fire, was born for battle. Not long after his removal, the U.S. Army realized it couldn't afford to waste a commander who understood men the way Allen did. He was quietly given a new command, the 104th Infantry Division, nicknamed the Timberwolves. These were fresh troops, untested and nervous, but under Allen's leadership, they transformed into one of the most effective fighting units in Europe. Allen taught them the same lessons that had carried him through North Africa and Sicily. Don't fight like machines. Fight like men who refuse to die. The Timberwolves learned fast. They trained hard, marched long, and absorbed Allen's philosophy of courage and compassion. He drilled them in night fighting, insisting that the enemy sleeps, we won't. When they finally landed in Europe, their reputation followed close behind. And just like before, Allen didn't lead from behind a desk. He led from the mud, from the trenches, from the heart of battle. Through France, Belgium, and into Germany, Allen's division became known for its precision and relentlessness. They liberated towns, freed civilians, and earned the respect of both allies and enemies. Even officers who had once doubted him began to admit the man who broke the rules had somehow rewritten them. But beyond tactics and victories, Allen's true genius was human. He knew the weight of war didn't rest on medals or stars. It rested on the faces of tired men trying to survive another day. He visited field hospitals, wrote to soldiers' families, and fought for better treatment of the wounded. When others gave speeches, Allen gave comfort. And yet, even after the war ended, the nickname Terrible Terry remained, not as an insult, but as a badge of honor. To the Germans, he had been a relentless enemy. To his soldiers, he was the kind of leader you meet once in a lifetime. He never chased glory. He chased results. And those results were measured not in headlines, but in lives saved. Thousands of airmen, infantrymen, and ordinary soldiers who came home because of the instincts of one man who refused to fight by the book. When Terry de la Mesa Allen passed away in 1969, veterans of 2 wars came to pay their respects. They didn't talk about medals or ranks. They talked about his laugh, his courage, his unshakable belief that men mattered more than orders. He wasn't perfect, one old soldier said quietly. But in war, you don't need perfect. You need Terry Allen. His legacy endures, not in history books, but in the hearts of those who followed him through hell and came back alive. Because sometimes the most terrible man in war is the one who saves the most lives.